My son grabbed a broomstick to force me to confess to a betrayal my daughter-in-law had invented at Christmas dinner. Then, without saying a word, I took control of the television and let the video that revealed my daughter-in-law's dirty little secret play in front of the entire family. But let me back up a little so you understand how we got here. The living room was packed with people. My sisters, my brothers-in-law, my nephews and nieces, all sitting around the Christmas dinner table. The food was still steaming on the plates. The lights on the Christmas tree blinked in the corner. Everything seemed perfect until Jessica opened her mouth and began to destroy my life in front of everyone. Michael, my son, was standing in front of me. His eyes were red, filled with rage, looking at me as if I were the worst traitor in the world. He was shaking with fury. Jessica was behind him, with her arms crossed and that almost invisible smile that only I could see. She had just told the whole family that I had ruined her career, that I had revealed secrets about her job to the neighbors, that because of me, he had lost the promotion he had been waiting on for years. No one defended me. No one said anything. They just watched, some with pity, others with curiosity, as if they were watching a show. Michael raised that broomstick and held it over my head. I do not know if he really intended to hit me or just wanted to scare me, but in that moment, I felt something inside me break. I had spent 70 years of my life being the perfect mother, the one who was always there, the one who cooked, cared, sacrificed, the one who never asked for anything in return. And now my own son looked at me as if I were garbage. Jessica took a step forward. She put her hand on Michael's shoulder, as if she were the concerned wife, the woman who only wanted to protect her husband. But I knew that look, that cold look she had been shooting at me for years. She wanted to see me destroyed. She wanted to see me on my knees begging for forgiveness for something I never did. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, but every word was like poison. She said she had always suspected me, that I had always been jealous of her relationship with Michael, that I could not stand seeing him happy with another woman, that I had done everything possible to ruin their marriage, and now his job, too. The family remained silent. Some nodded their heads, as if Jessica's words made sense. My sister Margaret stared at me with wide eyes, but she did not say anything either. No one defended me, no one questioned Jessica. Only I knew the truth. And the truth was that Jessica had a secret so dirty that if it came to light, her perfect life would crumble in seconds. I knew it. I had the proof, and I had been saving it, waiting for the right moment to use it. I never thought that moment would arrive at a Christmas dinner, with my son threatening me with a broomstick. But there it was. The moment had come. Michael screamed again. He wanted me to confess. He wanted me to admit that I had betrayed the family. He wanted me to kneel and beg for forgiveness in front of everyone. His voice cracked between rage and something that sounded like pain. And I understood in that instant that he really believed Jessica's lies. My own son believed I was capable of destroying him. I felt the tears starting to rise, but I stopped them. I was not going to cry, not in front of her, not in front of any of them. I had cried enough in my life. I had cried when my husband abandoned me. I had cried when I had to raise Michael alone. I had cried every time he treated me as if I were invisible. But not this time. This time I was going to do something different. I looked Jessica directly in the eyes. She smiled. She thought she had won. She thought I was going to break down, to beg, to humiliate myself. But she was wrong. Without saying a word, I stood up from the chair. My legs were shaking, but I managed to stand firm. I walked toward the table where the television remote control was. Michael lowered the broomstick for a moment, confused. Everyone watched me, not understanding what I was doing. I took the remote with trembling hands. I turned on the television. The screen lit up in the middle of the living room. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the device and my heavy breathing. I pulled up the video on my phone. That video I had kept for weeks. That video I never thought I would have to show. I connected my phone to the television. My fingers could barely touch the buttons correctly, but I managed. And then, without warning, without explaining anything, I let the video start playing. The entire room froze. On the screen appeared Jessica, but it was not the Jessica of now, the perfect wife, the concerned daughter-in-law. It was another Jessica, one my son had never seen. Michael dropped the broomstick. It hit the floor with a dry thud. His eyes were fixed on the screen, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Jessica turned pale. She tried to move, tried to say something, but she could not. The words got stuck in her throat. The video kept playing. Every second was like a bomb exploding in the middle of the living room. The whole family watched in shock. Some covered their mouths. Others looked at each other, not knowing what to do. And I, for the first time in years, felt free. The video continued playing on the screen. Jessica was in an elegant restaurant, one of those places where dinner costs more than $200 a person. She was wearing a red dress that I had never seen on her before. Her hair was down, makeup perfect, smiling in a way she never smiled at home. And across from her, holding her hand over the table, was Robert, my son's boss, the same man who had supposedly denied Michael the promotion. The camera shook a little because I had held it myself that day. I had gone downtown to do some shopping when I saw them enter that place together. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe a work meeting. But something inside me told me it was not normal, so I waited outside. I waited almost 2 hours until I decided to go in and record what I saw. In the video, Robert leaned over the table and kissed Jessica. It was not a quick peck. It was not a mistake. It was a long, passionate kiss, one of those that leave no room for doubt. Jessica smiled at him afterward. She caressed his face, whispered something in his ear that could not be heard, but clearly made him laugh. Michael was still standing in the middle of the living room, motionless, like a statue. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. His hands trembled at his sides. He looked at the video, then at Jessica, then back at the video, as if his brain could not process what he was seeing. Jessica finally reacted. She ran toward the television, trying to turn it off, but my niece Sarah was faster and stepped in front of the device, blocking her path. Jessica screamed that it was a lie, that the video was edited, that I had invented it all because I was jealous of her. But her voice sounded desperate, broken, nothing like the confident and sweet voice from a few minutes ago. My sister Margaret stood up from her chair and walked over to me. She put a hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eyes. She did not say anything, but her look said it all. She knew I was not capable of lying. She knew that for all these years I had endured Jessica's humiliations in silence. And now she finally understood why. The video reached the end. The screen went black. The silence in the room was so heavy, I felt it crushing me. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Jessica's sobbing. She was now sitting on the floor with her hands covering her face. Michael turned slowly toward her. His eyes were no longer full of rage. They were filled with something worse. Disappointment, pain, betrayal. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if he had never really known her. And maybe he never did. Maybe all this time he had been living with a lie. Then he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. But in that silence, it was heard clearly. He asked her how long had she been deceiving him? How long had she been laughing at him behind his back? Jessica did not answer. She just cried and shook her head, as if denying it could change what we had all just seen. My brother-in-law Richard cleared his throat and asked if anyone else knew about this. No one answered. Everyone remained in shock. I sat back down in my chair, suddenly feeling very tired. I had kept that secret for so long that now that it was out, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Jessica finally stood up. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, ruining all her makeup. She looked at me with so much hatred that for a moment I thought she was going to lung at me. But instead, she pointed a shaking finger at me and said I had no right to judge her, that I was a bitter old woman who had never accepted that Michael had his own life, that the only thing I had ever done was meddle in their marriage. I laughed. I could not help it. It was a short, bitter laugh, filled with all the years of accumulated pain. I asked her if that was all she had to say. If, after being caught betraying my son, the only thing she could do was attack me. I told her she had had many opportunities to be honest, that she had had many opportunities to walk away if she did not love Michael. But instead, she chose to lie, manipulate, and destroy. Michael sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. My nephew David walked over to him and asked if he was okay, but Michael did not answer. He just sat there, breathing heavily, trying to process everything he had just discovered. Jessica tried to approach him. She tried to put her hand on his shoulder, but Michael pushed her away with a sharp movement. He told her not to touch him, that he did not want to see her, that he did not want to hear any of her lies. His voice cracked at the end, and I could see tears starting to roll down his cheeks. It was in that moment that I understood something. My son was not crying just because of Jessica's betrayal. He was crying because he realized he had treated me poorly, that he had threatened me, that he had believed his wife's lies without even asking for my side of the story. He was crying because he knew he had lost me. Margaret stood in the middle of the room and raised her voice. She said this dinner was over, that it was best for everyone to go home and let Michael and Jessica resolve their problems. But Jessica screamed no, that she was not going to leave like that she needed to explain what had happened. Then she started to speak. She said that Robert had pursued her for months, that he was her boss, and she was afraid of losing her job if she rejected him, that she had only gone out with him that one time to make it clear she was not interested, that the kiss had been his idea, not hers, that it had all been a terrible misunderstanding. But I knew the truth, and I was not going to let her keep lying. I took out my phone again. I searched for the messages. Those text messages Jessica had sent to Robert over months, messages I had found by accident one day when she left her phone forgotten at my house. Messages where she told him she loved him, that she wanted to be with him, that Michael was an idiot who was never going to amount to anything, that she was just waiting for the right moment to leave him. I began to read the messages out loud. Every word was like a nail being driven into my son's heart. Jessica tried to snatch the phone from me, but Sarah and my other niece, Emily, stopped her. They told her to stay still, that she had done enough damage. When I finished reading, the room was plunged into a sepulchral silence. Michael had a 1,000-yard stare, as if his soul had left his body. Jessica was no longer crying. She was just standing there, arms hanging, defeated, with nothing left to say. Margaret walked toward Jessica and told her to leave, to take her things and get out of that house immediately, that she was not welcome in this family ever again. Jessica looked at Michael, hoping he would defend her, that he would say something, but Michael did not look up. He said nothing. He just remained sitting there, destroyed. Jessica finally understood that she had lost. She walked toward the bedroom to get her things. Some relatives began to stand up, uncomfortable, not knowing what to do or say. Christmas dinner had turned into a nightmare. I remained seated in my chair, looking at the Christmas tree with its blinking lights. I thought about all the years I had spent cooking, cleaning, caring for my son. I thought about all the times Jessica had humiliated me, and I had remained silent. I thought about how my own son had raised a stick against me without even listening to my version. And in that moment, I knew something had changed forever. I was no longer the same woman I was an hour ago. I was no longer going to keep enduring it. I was no longer going to keep being invisible. Jessica came out of the room dragging a travel bag. Her makeup was completely ruined. Black lines of mascara ran down her cheeks. Nothing remained of that perfect woman who always showed herself to the family. She passed by me without looking at me, but I could feel her hatred. She opened the front door and left, slamming it so hard the walls shook. The family began to disperse slowly. No one knew what to say. My brother-in-law Richard gave my shoulder a squeeze before leaving. Margaret hugged me tight and whispered in my ear that I had done the right thing, that it was about time someone put that woman in her place. My nieces looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration. Michael was still sitting on the sofa, head in his hands. He had not moved since I read the messages. When the last relative left and it was just him and me in the living room, he looked up slowly. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then he spoke. His voice was barely a broken whisper. He asked me why I had not told him anything before. Why had I waited so long to show him the truth? Why had I let things go so far? I stayed silent for a moment. There were many possible answers to those questions, but the truth was simple and painful. I told him that I did try to tell him, that I had tried to talk to him many times, that I had tried to warn him about Jessica, but he never listened to me. He always took her side. He always made me feel like I was the problem. Michael closed his eyes. He knew it was true. For years he had chosen to believe Jessica's words over mine. He had chosen to think I was a meddling mother-in-law instead of a concerned mother, and now he was paying the price for that decision. I asked him if he remembered the time I tried to talk to him about the strange charges on his credit card, meals at expensive restaurants, when he had told me he was working late, purchases at clothing stores that Jessica never wore at home. He had yelled at me that day. He had told me to stop watching him like he was a child, that Jessica had the right to treat herself. That I understood nothing about modern relationships. Michael covered his face with his hands. He did not need me to say more. He himself was remembering all those signs he had ignored, all those moments when I had tried to protect him, and he had rejected me. I stood up from my chair. My legs were still shaking a little, but I managed to walk to where he was. I sat next to him on the sofa. I did not touch him. I just stayed there, feeling the weight of the silence between us, a silence that had been building for years. Michael began to speak. He told me things I already knew but that he had never admitted. He told me that Jessica had been pressuring him for months to get me out of the house, that she said I was a burden, that I took up space they needed, that my presence ruined their intimacy. Michael had resisted at first, but over time she had convinced him little by little. He told me that the promotion at work had been real, that Robert had really promised it to him. But at the last moment, they had given the position to another coworker without any explanation. Michael had been devastated. He had worked so hard for years. He had sacrificed time with his family. He had done everything they asked, and still, they had passed him over. Now it all made sense. Robert had denied Michael the promotion because he was too busy sleeping with his wife. Maybe he had even done it on purpose, to keep Michael in a lower position, to keep feeling superior while he stole everything he had. I asked Michael when Jessica had started to change, when he had noticed something was wrong. He sat thinking for a long while. Then he told me it had been about 8 months ago. She had gotten a new job at the same company where he worked. Robert had been the one who recommended her, supposedly because they needed someone with her experience. Since then, Jessica had started coming home late, going out more on weekends with her friends from work, always being glued to her phone. Michael had noticed the changes, but when he asked her, she always had a perfect excuse. And he wanted to believe her. He wanted to think everything was fine. He confessed something to me that broke my heart. He told me that in recent weeks, Jessica barely touched him, that they slept in the same bed, but it was like they were strangers, that every time he tried to get close, she said she was tired, that she had a headache, that she needed space. Michael thought the problem was him, that maybe he was no longer enough for her, that maybe he was failing as a husband. I put my hand on his. It was the first time in years we had touched like that. I told him none of this was his fault, that Jessica had made her own decisions, that she had chosen to lie, cheat, and destroy, that he did not have to carry that guilt. But Michael shook his head. He said he did have guilt, that he was guilty for treating me poorly all these years, for believing Jessica's lies about me, for raising that broomstick against his own mother. He looked at me with eyes full of tears and asked for forgiveness. I did not know what to say. For years I had dreamed of hearing those words. I had dreamed that my son would finally recognize all the harm he had done to me. But now that it was happening, I did not feel the joy I expected. I only felt tiredness, a deep tiredness that reached down to my bones. I told him I was tired, that I had spent my whole life taking care of him, sacrificing for him, always putting him first, that I had endured Jessica's humiliations in silence because I did not want to cause trouble, that I had accepted being treated as invisible because I thought that was what a good mother did. But I could not do it anymore. I no longer wanted to keep being that woman who made herself small so others could feel big. I no longer wanted to keep swallowing the words, the tears, the pain. I had spent 70 years of my life living for others, and I did not have much time left to live for myself. Michael asked me what I was going to do. If I was going to stay in the house, if we could try to fix things between us. I did not answer immediately. I looked around that living room where I had spent so many dinners, so many celebrations, so many moments that were supposed to be happy, but always ended up making me feel like I was in the way. I told him I needed time to think, that I needed space to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, that for the first time in a long time, I was going to think about myself before anyone else. Michael nodded. He did not try to convince me to stay. He did not try to promise me that everything was going to change. I think he also knew that there were things that were broken beyond repair, that there were words that once said could not be erased, that there were actions that left permanent scars. I got up from the sofa. I walked toward my bedroom slowly. Every step felt heavy, as if I were walking underwater. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed. The room was dark except for the moonlight coming in through the window. I looked at my hands, old, wrinkled hands, full of age spots, hands that had worked so hard all my life, hands that had cooked thousands of meals, washed thousands of dishes, scrubbed thousands of floors, hands that had cared, hugged, comforted, and that now trembled with exhaustion and something else, with rage held back for too long. I thought about everything that had happened that night, how it had started with me being accused of betrayal and had ended with me exposing the real traitor, how my son had been about to hit me and was now destroyed in the living room, how Jessica had left the house dragging her bag, her perfect life blown to pieces. And I thought about me, about Eleanor Vance. Who was I beyond being a mother, beyond being a mother-in-law, beyond all the roles I had played for so many years? I tried to remember the last time I had done something just for me. When was the last time I had thought about my own dreams, my own desires, my own happiness? I could not remember. So much time had passed that I did not even know if I ever had. I lay down on the bed without changing my clothes, the Christmas dress wrinkled underneath me, but I did not care. I closed my eyes and let the tears finally come out. Tears I had been holding back all night. Tears for all the lost years, for all the endured humiliations, for all the love I had given without receiving anything in return. But there was also something else in those tears. There was relief, because finally I had told the truth. Finally I had defended myself. Finally I had stopped being invisible. I woke up early the next day. The sun was barely starting to rise, and the house was in complete silence. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, remembering everything that had happened the night before. For a moment I thought maybe it had been a dream, a strange nightmare. But then I saw my wrinkled Christmas dress, and I knew everything had been real. I got up slowly. My body ached as if I had been beaten. I guess the tension of the previous night had left its marks. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked tired, older than usual. I had deep circles under my eyes and my hair was completely messed up. But there was something different in my eyes. The look of defeat I had carried for so long was gone. I showered and put on comfortable clothes, some old pants and a simple blouse. I walked out of my room carefully, trying not to make noise. I did not know if Michael was still in the house or if he had left early. His bedroom door was closed. I decided not to knock. I went to the kitchen. The table still had the Christmas dinner plates. The food had sat there all night, cold and ruined. No one had had the spirit to clean up after everything that happened. I began to gather the plates one by one. It was mechanical work my hands knew well. I had cleaned this kitchen thousands of times. While I washed the dishes, my mind went back to weeks ago, to when all this had really started. It had been a normal Tuesday. I had gone to the market to buy vegetables for dinner. I needed tomatoes, onions, and some peppers. The market was near the downtown shopping district, where all the fancy restaurants are. I had finished my shopping and was waiting for the bus when I saw them, Jessica and Robert entering that expensive restaurant together. At first, I did not think anything bad. Maybe it was a business lunch. Maybe they were discussing some important project. But something in the way they walked together made me doubt. There was a familiarity in their movements that was not normal between a boss and an employee. I decided to wait. I do not know why I did it. Maybe it was a mother's intuition. Maybe it was something I had been suspecting for months without wanting to admit it. I sat on a park bench across from the restaurant and waited. 2 hours passed. 2 hours where I stayed there, ignoring the cold, ignoring the fatigue. When I finally decided to approach, I asked the waiter for permission to use the restroom. From there, I could see their table. They were in a private corner, away from other people. I saw how Robert took Jessica's hand over the table. I saw how she smiled in a way I had never seen her smile at my son. And then I saw the kiss. I took out my phone and recorded. My hands were shaking so much I thought I was going to drop the device, but I managed to capture enough. Enough so there would be no doubts. Enough so the truth would be undeniable. I walked out of that restaurant feeling sick. Not because of what I had seen, but because of what it meant. It meant my son was being betrayed. It meant that woman who slept in his bed every night was living a lie. It meant that all the contempt Jessica had shown me for years came from someone who had no moral right to judge me. That night, I tried to talk to Michael. I waited until Jessica went out to buy bread. I approached him while he was watching TV and told him we needed to talk. He barely looked at me. He asked what was wrong in an annoyed tone, as if I were an interruption in his day. I told him I had seen something that was going to hurt him, but he needed to know. Was it about Jessica? The moment I mentioned her name, Michael tensed up. He cut me off before I could continue. He told me he was not going to listen to any more of my stories about his wife, that he was tired of me always trying to cause trouble between them. I tried to insist. I told him this time was different, that I had proof, that I just needed him to watch a video. But he stood up from the sofa and told me he did not want to see anything, that Jessica had warned him I was going to try something like this, that she had told him I was jealous of their happiness and that I was going to invent anything to separate them. I stood there, with my phone in my hand, watching my son turn his back on me and go up the stairs. I heard him close his bedroom door, and I knew in that moment there was no way he would believe me, that Jessica had already prepared the ground perfectly, that anything I said was going to be seen as a lie. I kept the video. I kept it because I knew someday I was going to need it. I did not know when or how, but I was sure the moment would come when the truth would have to come out. And that Christmas night, that moment finally arrived. I finished washing the dishes and began to put away the food that could still be saved. I had prepared so much for that dinner. I had spent 2 days cooking: stuffed turkey, mashed potatoes, salad, 3 different types of desserts, all made with my own hands, thinking that maybe this Christmas would be different, that maybe this time Jessica would not make any hurtful comments, that maybe Michael would look at me with affection instead of indifference. But things never changed. Every celebration was the same. I cooked, served, cleaned, and at the end I stayed alone in the kitchen while everyone else had fun in the living room. Jessica always found something to criticize. The meat was too dry. The dessert was too sweet. The table was not set right. And Michael never said anything in my defense. He just stayed quiet, as if my feelings did not matter. I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Michael. He came into the kitchen looking as tired as I felt. He had not slept well, that was obvious. He sat in one of the chairs without saying anything. I kept cleaning the stove, not looking at him. After a long silence, he spoke. He asked me if I had slept well. It was an absurd question considering everything that had happened, but I guess he did not know what else to say. I answered that I had slept enough. He asked if I wanted to eat something for breakfast. I told him I was not hungry. He did not eat anything either. He just sat there, looking at the empty table. I could feel he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he spoke. He told me Jessica had been sending him text messages all night, that she wanted to talk to him, that she said they could fix things, that it had been a terrible mistake, but she still loved him. Michael asked me what he should do. I turned around to look at him. For years, my son had made all his decisions based on what Jessica wanted. Now, for the first time, he was asking for my opinion, but I was tired of giving advice no one listened to. I told him that was a decision only he could make, that I was no longer going to get involved in his life, that I had learned my lesson. Every time I had tried to protect him, I had ended up being the villain. So this time, he would have to decide alone. Michael remained silent. I think he expected me to tell him what to do, as I had always done when he was a child. But those days were over. I was no longer the mother who solved all his problems. I was no longer the one who always had an answer ready. He asked me if I believed Jessica truly loved him, if I believed there was any chance his marriage could be saved. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him the truth. I told him I did not know, that I did not know Jessica's real feelings. But what I did know was that a person who truly loves does not lie, does not cheat, and does not manipulate. I reminded him of the text messages I had read the night before, those messages where Jessica told Robert that Michael was an idiot, that he was not going to amount to anything, that she was just waiting for the right moment to leave him. I asked him if those sounded like the words of someone who loved. Michael lowered his head. He knew I was right, but he did not want to accept it. It is hard to accept that the person you shared your life with whom you made plans for the future, never really valued you. It is hard to accept you were deceived for so long. I told him something else, something he needed to hear even if it hurt. I told him Jessica had not only betrayed him, she had betrayed me too. She had used my love for my son against me. She had invented lies about me to push me away from him. She had turned every family moment into a silent battle where I always lost. And the worst of all was that he had let her do it. He had chosen to believe her instead of believing me. He had chosen his comfort over my dignity. He had chosen to keep the peace in his marriage at the cost of destroying our mother-son relationship. Michael began to cry. Not silent tears, deep sobs that shook his whole body. He covered his face with his hands and cried like I had not seen him cry since he was a little boy. I did not go over to comfort him. I stayed where I was, with the kitchen towel in my hands, watching him cry. Part of me wanted to hug him, like when he was a child. But another part, the part that had been hurt so many times, stood firm. I could no longer keep being the mother who absorbed all her son's pain while mine was ignored. After a while, Michael calmed down. He wiped his tears with his shirt sleeve and looked at me with red eyes. He told me he did not know how he had reached this point, that when he married Jessica, he thought he had found the perfect woman. She was beautiful, smart, ambitious. All his friends told him he was lucky to be with someone like her. At first, everything had been wonderful. Jessica was attentive, affectionate, always willing to listen to him. But things started to change slowly. So slowly, he did not even realize until it was too late. It started with small comments, that he did not earn enough money, that his clothes were not stylish enough, that his way of speaking was very simple. Jessica always said it with a smile, as if they were innocent jokes. But over time, those comments began to take a toll on him. He started feeling inadequate. He started believing he really was not enough for her. And the more insecure he felt, the more power he gave Jessica over him. Then the comments about me started. Jessica told him I was too meddlesome, that I did not respect their space as a couple, that I was always trying to control him. Michael did not believe her at first, but Jessica was smart. She never said anything when I was present. She always waited until they were alone to plant those seeds of doubt. He told me something I did not know. 6 months ago, Jessica had given him an ultimatum. Either he got me out of the house, or she was leaving. She told him she could not keep living under the same roof as me, that I was ruining their marriage, that every time she saw me, she felt judged and uncomfortable. Michael had been gathering the courage to talk to me about moving out. He had been looking at assisted living facilities, places where I could be comfortable, but far from them. He had not told me because he knew it was going to hurt me, but he had planned to do it right after the holidays. Hearing that was like receiving a stab wound. My own son had been planning to get rid of me. He had been looking for a way to get me out of his life, to keep a woman happy who was betraying him, a woman who did not love him, a woman who was probably laughing at him every time she slept with his boss. I asked him how he had planned to tell me. If he was going to be honest with me, or if he was going to invent some excuse. Michael did not answer. He just lowered his gaze, ashamed, and in that silence, I found my answer. He was going to lie to me. He was going to tell me it was for my own good, that I would be better off surrounded by people my age, that I would be happier in a place where I had activities and company. But the truth was simple. He wanted me out because I was an inconvenience, because Jessica did not want me there, and he preferred to please his wife than take care of his mother. I sat in the chair across from him. My legs could not hold me up anymore. I felt as if every revelation was taking a piece of my energy. I told him I appreciated his honesty, even though it had come too late, that at least now I knew exactly where I stood. Michael tried to explain himself. He said he had been a coward, that he had let Jessica manipulate him, that he should have been stronger, braver, that he should have defended me all the times she disrespected me, but that he was afraid of losing her, afraid of ending up alone, afraid of facing the reality that his marriage was not what he believed. I told him we all have fear, that I had been afraid my whole life, afraid when my husband abandoned us and I was left alone with a child to raise, afraid when I had no money for food and had to decide between eating myself or giving it all to him, afraid every time he got sick, and I could not afford to go to the doctor because I needed to save every penny for his education. But I never let that fear turn me into someone cruel. I never let that fear make me treat the people I loved poorly. And I definitely never let that fear blind me to the truth. Michael asked me what I was going to do now, if I was going to stay in the house or if I was going to leave. I still did not have an answer. I had spent so many years living in this house, taking care of him, that I did not know what my life would be like somewhere else. But I knew something had to change. I could not keep being the same woman I had been until yesterday. I told him I needed a few days to think, that I was going to use that time to decide what was best for me. Not for him, not for the family, for me. It was the first time in my life I was going to make a completely selfish decision, and I did not feel guilty about it. Michael nodded. He stood up from the chair, and before leaving the kitchen, he stopped at the door. Without turning to see me, he told me he was sorry, that he was sorry for everything. Every hurtful word he hadn't stopped, every slight he had ignored, every time he had chosen Jessica over me, he was sorry for it all. But his apologies were arriving late. Too late to erase years of pain. Too late to change everything that had happened. Words are important, but actions are more so. And his actions had spoken very clearly for a long time. When he left, I remained alone in the kitchen. The house was silent again, a silence that no longer scared me. In fact, I was starting to appreciate it. In that silence, I could hear my own thoughts without the interference of others' needs. I thought about my life, how I had gotten here. I remembered when Michael was little, and I worked cleaning houses to be able to pay for his school supplies. I earned barely $30 a day, but every cent went to him. For his notebooks, his pencils, his clothes. I wore the same clothes for years. I ate the bare minimum. Everything was for him. When he got sick with pneumonia at 7 years old, I almost died of worry. I had no health insurance. I had no money saved. I had to borrow from neighbors, from acquaintances, from anyone who could help. The hospital charged me almost $2,000. It took me 3 years to pay that debt. 3 years working double shifts, eating once a day, walking miles to save bus fare. But I did it. I paid every cent because he was my son and I would do anything for him. I thought that when he grew up, he would understand everything I had sacrificed. I thought he would value me. I thought he would take care of me when I was old, the same way I had taken care of him. But life does not work that way. Children do not always appreciate their parents' sacrifices. Sometimes they simply see them as something normal, something they deserve. And when you grow up giving everything without expecting anything in return, you end up being invisible. I walked toward the kitchen window. From there, I could see the small backyard. I had planted those flowers years ago, roses, jasmines, some herbs for cooking. I had tended that garden with as much love as I had tended my son. And now, looking at it, I realized the plants were better taken care of than me. I watered them every day. I gave them fertilizer. I removed the dry leaves. I made sure they had enough sun, but not too much. I protected them from pests, and they bloomed beautifully, full of life. But I had withered. I had dried up, waiting for someone to take care of me the same way I took care of everything else. I heard Michael leaving the house. I heard the sound of his car starting. He was probably going to work, even though it was the day after Christmas. Or maybe he just needed to get out, get away from the house that was now full of bitter memories. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Black coffee, no sugar, just how I always drank it. I sat at the kitchen table and drank slowly. The coffee was hot and bitter. Perfect. While I drank, I started thinking about options, possibilities, things I had never allowed myself to consider before. I could stay here. I could accept Michael's apologies and try to rebuild our relationship. I could wait for him to learn from his mistakes and become the son I had always wished to have. But that would mean continuing to live in this house, with these memories, waiting for something to change. Or I could leave. I could start over somewhere else, look for a small apartment for myself, a place where I did not have to walk on tiptoes, where I did not have to worry about bothering anyone, where I could be myself without asking for permission. The idea scared me. I was 70 years old. I had never lived alone. I had always had someone to take care of, someone to worry about. First my son, then my daughter-in-law. I had always been defined by my relationship with others. I had never been just Eleanor, just me. But maybe it was time to discover who Eleanor Vance was when she was not being a mother, when she was not being a mother-in-law, when she was not being anything other than herself. I spent the next 3 days in the house almost without speaking to anyone. Michael left early and came back late. When we crossed paths in the kitchen or the living room, we exchanged brief greetings and nothing more. It was as if we were both walking on broken glass, afraid to say something that could make things worse. Jessica had not returned. Michael told me she was staying at her sister's house, that she kept sending him messages, asking for a chance to explain herself, to fix things. But he had not answered any. I think he was still in shock, trying to process everything he had discovered. I spent the hours thinking about my life, my options, what I wanted to do with the time I had left. One morning, while drinking coffee, I made a decision. I was going to go out for a walk around the neighborhood. I needed fresh air. I needed to see the world outside these 4 walls. I put on an old sweater and went out. The sun was bright that day. It was cold, but not too bad. I walked through the streets I knew so well. I had lived in this neighborhood for almost 20 years. I knew every corner, every store, every neighbor. But that day I saw everything with different eyes. I passed by the bakery where I bought bread every morning. Mr. Miller, the owner, waved at me from inside. I waved back, but I did not go in as I normally did. I kept walking. I passed the pharmacy, the park where I sometimes sat to watch the children play, the church I went to on Sundays. And then I saw something I had never noticed before. A small sign in a window. For rent, 1 bedroom, $800 a month. It was an old building, but well kept. It had a clean entrance with potted plants on the sides. I stood in front of that sign for several minutes. $800. I had some money saved. Not much, but enough to pay a few months' rent while I found some work. I could clean houses again. I could babysit. I could do something. I was not too old to work, and I was definitely not too old to start over. I wrote down the phone number on a piece of paper I found in my pocket. I did not know if I was really going to call, but having that option made me feel a little more in control of my life. I kept walking until I reached a small park a few blocks from the house. I sat on a bench. There was an older woman sitting on the bench next to me. She must have been my age, maybe a little older. She was feeding breadcrumbs to the pigeons. She looked at me and smiled. I returned the smile. We started talking. She told me her name was Susan Miller, that she lived alone in an apartment nearby since her husband had passed away 5 years ago. She told me that at first it had been very difficult, that she did not know how to live without him after 40 years of marriage, but that over time she had learned to enjoy her solitude. I told her a little about my situation, not all the details, but enough for her to understand why I was considering moving. Susan listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put a hand on my shoulder and told me something I will never forget. She told me it is never too late to choose yourself, that she had spent her whole life taking care of her husband, her children, her house, and when she finally was left alone, she discovered she did not know who she was without all those roles. But little by little she had learned. She had learned to cook just for herself, to watch the movies she liked, to wake up late if she wanted, to not ask permission for anything. She told me the first few months were the hardest. The guilt was constant. She felt she was being selfish for thinking of herself, but then she understood it was not selfishness, it was survival. It was giving value to her own life before it was too late. We talked for almost an hour. She gave me her phone number and told me to call her whenever I wanted, that if I decided to move, she could help me with the first few days, that she knew how hard it was to start something new at our age. When I returned to the house, I felt different, lighter somehow, as if talking to Susan had given me permission to do what my heart already knew I needed to do. I went into my room and pulled an old box out of the closet. I started going through my things. I had so few real possessions. Most of the things in this house were Michael's or Jessica's. My things fit in 2 small boxes, some clothes, some old photos, a couple of books I had read so many times the pages were yellowed. That was all I had after 70 years of life. I found a photo of when Michael was little. He must have been about 5 years old. He was smiling, showing the gap where he was missing a tooth. I was behind him, with my hands on his shoulders. I looked so young in that photo, so full of hope, so sure that all the sacrifice would be worth it. I put the photo back in the box, not with nostalgia, but with acceptance. That child in the photo had grown up. He had become a man who no longer needed me in the way I needed to be needed. And that was okay. It was part of life. Children grow up and make their own lives. The problem was that I had forgotten to make mine. That night, during dinner, I told Michael we needed to talk. He put his fork down on the plate and looked at me with concern. He probably thought I was going to tell him something terrible. But what I had to tell him was not terrible. It was necessary. I told him I had decided to move out, that I had found a small apartment in the neighborhood and was going to see it tomorrow, that if everything went well, I would move before the month ended. Michael stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me why. I explained it was not out of anger. It was not to punish him. It was simply because I needed my own space. I needed to discover who Eleanor Vance was when she was not defined by being someone's mother. I needed to live for myself, even if it was for a while. Michael tried to convince me to stay. He said things were going to be different now, that he was going to be a better son, that he was going to value me more, that he was never again going to allow anyone to disrespect me in his house. But I had heard promises before, and I knew promises were easy to make and hard to keep. I told him I appreciated his words, but that this decision had nothing to do with him. It had to do with me, with what I needed to be happy, with what I deserved after so many years of putting everyone before myself. Michael had tears in his eyes. He asked me if I was ever going to forgive him, if we were going to be able to have a normal mother-son relationship someday. I told him I did not know. That forgiveness takes time, that wounds do not heal overnight, but that maybe, with distance and time, we could find a way to rebuild something. He asked if he could help me with the move, if he could at least do that for me. I told him yes, that when the moment came, I would accept his help, not because I needed it, but because maybe it was a first step towards something better between us. That night I slept better than I had slept in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt I had control over my own life, that I was not simply letting things happen to me. I was making decisions. I was choosing my own path. The next day I called the number for the apartment. A kind woman told me I could go see it that same afternoon. I got ready, put on my best clothes, and went. The apartment was on the second floor. It was small but cozy. It had a bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room that also served as a dining room. The windows faced the street and let in a lot of natural light. The walls needed a fresh coat of paint, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. The floor was clean. It had a small closet that was more than enough for my few clothes. And best of all, it had a feeling of peace I had not felt in years. The lady who showed me the apartment told me she needed the first month and a security deposit, $1,600 in total. I had $2,500 saved. I had been putting away small amounts for years, from the little I earned, helping some neighbors with housework. I told her I would take it, that I could pay her right there if necessary. She smiled and told me I could move in within a week. She gave me the keys, and we signed a simple contract. When I walked out of that building with the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt hope. I walked back to the house slowly. I was in no hurry. For the first time in a long time, I did not have to rush to prepare dinner. I did not have to worry about arriving on time to have everything ready. I simply walked, enjoying the sun on my face, thinking about what my new life was going to be like. When I arrived, Michael was in the living room. I showed him the keys. I told him I was moving in a week. He nodded slowly. I could see the sadness in his eyes, but also something else. Respect, maybe, or admiration. As if he were finally seeing his mother not as someone who was always going to be there, no matter how she was treated, but as a real person with her own needs and boundaries. The days before the move passed quickly. I packed my few belongings in 3 cardboard boxes. Michael helped me get them from the grocery store on the corner. As I packed my clothes, my books, and the few things that really mattered to me, I realized how little I had accumulated in 70 years of life. Almost everything I had bought, cleaned, or cared for in this house belonged to others. My sister Margaret came over 2 days before the move. She sat on my bed while I folded clothes and asked if I was sure about what I was doing. I told her I had never been more sure of anything in my life. She smiled and hugged me. She told me she admired my courage, that she too had once thought about living alone, having her own space, but never had the courage to do it. I told her about Susan, the woman I had met in the park, about how her words had given me the strength to take this step. Margaret told me that maybe that had been a sign from the universe, that sometimes we meet the exact people we need at the exact moment we need them. While I was packing, I found things I had forgotten I had. A ring my mother had given me before dying, an embroidered handkerchief I had made when Michael was a baby, an old letter my husband had written to me before abandoning us. I read it for the first time in years. It said pretty things about the future we were going to build together, a future that never arrived. I put the letter back in its yellowed envelope. It no longer hurt to read it. I no longer felt anything for that man who had left me alone with a small child. Time had healed that wound, and I knew time would also heal the wounds I carried now. Michael had been avoiding the subject of Jessica, but finally one night he told me she had gone to look for him at his work, that she had made a scene in front of his coworkers, crying and asking him to forgive her. Robert had also been there, and the situation had become very awkward. Michael had asked her to leave and never look for him again. He told me he had submitted his resignation, that he could not keep working in a place where everyone knew his wife had cheated on him with his boss, that the humiliation was too great. He had gotten interviews at other companies and was hopeful about finding something soon. I asked him how he really felt, not about the job, but about Jessica, about the end of his marriage. Michael stayed quiet for a long time. Then he told me he felt as if he had woken up from a long dream, that for years he had been living in a fantasy, believing he had the perfect marriage with the perfect woman, and now that that illusion had broken, he did not know who he really was. I told him something my mother had told me once, that crises break us, but it is in those cracks where the light gets in, that sometimes we need to break completely to be able to rebuild ourselves in a stronger and more real way. Michael nodded. I think he understood what I meant. The night before my move, Michael made dinner. It was something simple, pasta with tomato sauce, but the gesture meant a lot. We ate together in silence for a while. Then he spoke. He told me he had been thinking a lot about everything that had happened, about how he had failed as a son, about how he had treated me. He told me he understood if I could never forgive him completely, that he understood if our relationship never went back to what he had destroyed, but that he wanted to try, that he wanted to be better, not just for me, but for himself, because he had realized that the man he had become was not the man he wanted to be. I told him I appreciated his words, that the fact he could recognize his mistakes was already a big step, but that forgiveness was a process, not an event, that it was going to take time, that maybe we would never go back to how things were before, but we could build something new, something different, but just as valuable. He asked me if he could visit me in my new apartment. I told him yes, but on one condition. That when he came, he would not be the son who needed something from his mother, that he would come as a person who wanted to share time with another person, as two adults who respect each other. Michael promised it would be so. That night, as I lay down for the last time in that room where I had slept for so many years, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness for everything that had happened, but there was also excitement for what was coming. There was fear of the unknown, but there was also freedom. I thought about the woman I had been when I arrived at this house for the first time. A woman who believed her only purpose was to serve her son. A woman who made herself invisible so others could shine. A woman who thought love meant sacrificing everything without expecting anything in return. And I thought about the woman I was now, a woman who had finally learned that loving herself was not selfishness, that setting boundaries was not cruelty, that choosing herself did not mean abandoning others. It was simply recognizing that her life also had value. The next morning, Michael helped me take my boxes to the car I had rented. They weren't many things. Everything fit easily. While I put the last box in the back seat, I looked at the house one last time. That house I had cleaned 1,000 times. That kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals. That living room where I had spent so many nights alone, while others laughed and talked, ignoring my presence. I did not feel nostalgia. I only felt I was closing a chapter, and even though I did not know exactly what the next chapter would be like, I knew it was going to be written by me, on my own terms, with my own rules. Michael hugged me before I got in the car. It was a long, tight hug, full of things words could not express. When we separated, we both had tears in our eyes. But they were different tears than the ones we had cried at Christmas. These tears were of acceptance, of closure, of a painful but necessary new beginning. I told him I would call him when I was settled. He nodded and took a step back. I got in the car, started the engine, and began to drive. In the rearview mirror, I saw Michael standing in the driveway, watching me leave. He looked small, alone, lost. Part of me wanted to turn around and stay to comfort him. But I kept driving, because this time, for the first time in my life, I was my priority. I arrived at my new apartment with my heart beating fast. I parked the car in front of the building and sat for a few minutes, looking at the entrance. This was my new home, my own space, a place where no one was going to judge me, where no one was going to make me feel like I was unwanted, where I was the owner of my own life. I carried the boxes up one by one. The building did not have an elevator, so I had to climb the stairs several times. By the time I finished, I was out of breath and my knees hurt. But I didn't care. Every step I took toward that apartment was a step toward my freedom. I opened the door and went in. The apartment was empty except for some basic furniture that came included. An old but decent bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a worn sofa in the living room. It was not much, but it was enough. It was mine. I left the boxes on the floor and walked through every room. The kitchen was small but had everything necessary. A stove, a refrigerator, enough space in the cabinets. The bathroom was clean, with an old shower curtain that needed a good scrub but worked fine. The bedroom had a large window that let in a lot of light. I sat on the sofa and breathed deep. The silence was different here. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of being ignored. It was a peaceful silence, a silence that belonged to me. I closed my eyes and for the first time in years, I felt real peace. I spent the rest of the day unpacking. I hung my clothes in the closet. I put my books on a small shelf in the living room. I placed the photos I had brought on the nightstand. The photo of Michael as a child was there too. Despite everything, he was still my son. And that part of our history, when he was small and innocent, was something I wanted to keep. At sunset, I called Susan. I told her I had moved. She was happy and told me she would come visit me the next day, that she would bring something to eat to celebrate my new beginning. That simple promise made me smile. It had been so long since anyone offered to do something for me without me having to ask. That night I ate something simple I had bought at the corner store. A sandwich and some juice. I ate alone at my small table, looking out the window toward the street. I saw people passing, each with their own lives, their own problems, their own stories, and I realized I was one of them. One more person in the world, trying to find her place. After eating, I took a long bath. The hot water relaxed my tired muscles. I sat there in the tub, letting the water cover me, feeling it wash away all the tension accumulated over years. When I got out, I put on an old nightgown and got into bed. The bed was harder than I was used to. The sheets smelled different. The sounds of the street were louder here than at Michael's house. But none of that bothered me. I curled up under the blankets and closed my eyes, and I slept deeply, without nightmares, without worries, without that constant anxiety of not knowing when the next flight would come. The first days were an adjustment. I learned the building's routine. I met some neighbors. The lady in the apartment below was named Sarah Fontes, and she had 3 cats. The man in the apartment next door was Tom, a quiet man who worked nights at a factory. Everyone was kind to me. No one looked at me with pity or contempt. We were just neighbors, sharing the same space. Susan came to visit me, as she had promised. She brought homemade chicken soup and lemonade. We sat in my small living room and ate together while she told me stories about her life. She told me about her children who lived in other cities and visited her occasionally. She told me about her late husband and how she had learned to live without him. She told me something important, that loneliness and being alone are 2 different things. Loneliness is when you feel empty, even if you are surrounded by people. Being alone is when you are with yourself and you feel complete. For years, I had been lonely in a house full of people. Now I was alone in an empty apartment, but I felt more accompanied than ever. Susan became my friend. We started seeing each other regularly. We went to the market together on Wednesdays. We sat in the park on Sundays to feed the pigeons. We drank coffee in her apartment or mine, talking about everything and nothing. It was a simple but real friendship, without complications, without expectations, just two older women enjoying each other's company. After 2 weeks in the apartment, Michael called. He asked if he could come visit me. I told him yes. We set it for Sunday afternoon. I was nervous that morning. I cleaned the apartment even though it was already clean. I made coffee and bought some cookies. I didn't know how it was going to be seeing him in this new context. He arrived on time. He knocked on the door softly. When I opened it, I noticed he looked different. Thinner, more tired, but also more present somehow. He no longer had that distant look he always had when we lived together. He hugged me, and we went inside. Michael looked around the apartment. He didn't say anything about how small it was or how simple the furniture was. He just said it felt cozy, that it felt like a home. We sat down to drink coffee and talked. He told me he had gotten a new job. It paid less than the previous one, but the environment was better. He told me he had started the divorce proceedings with Jessica, that she had tried to contact him several times, but he had been firm in his decision. He told me he was going to therapy to work on his problems and understand why he had allowed things to get so far. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, he asked how I was, and for the first time in a long time, I told him the truth. I told him I was fine, that I was discovering who I was outside the role of mother, that I had made a friend, that I was thinking of looking for some part-time work, not because I needed the money urgently, but because I wanted to feel useful in a different way. Michael smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. He told me he was happy for me, that he felt guilty I had to leave his house to find this peace, but at the same time he understood it had been necessary, that maybe we both needed this distance to be able to heal. We were together a couple of hours. When he left, he hugged me at the door. He told me he loved me. I told him I loved him too. And it was true. Despite all the pain, despite all the wounds, he was still my son, and I would always love him. But now that love no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. It was just a part of me, not everything I was. After he left, I sat on my sofa and looked out the window. The sun was setting, and the sky was tinged with orange and pink. I thought about the whole road I had traveled since that Christmas night. How a single decision, showing that video, had changed everything. But I didn't regret it, not for a second, because that decision had led me here, to this small apartment, where finally I could breathe, where finally I could be myself. 6 months passed since I moved into my apartment. 6 months that felt like a whole lifetime. I had found work taking care of an elderly lady 3 times a week. They paid me $400 a week, enough to cover my rent and my basic expenses. The job wasn't hard, and the lady was kind. She reminded me of myself in some ways. A woman who had dedicated her life to others and was now alone. Susan and I had become inseparable. We cooked together. We went to the movies on Tuesdays when tickets cost only $5. And we spent afternoons knitting and telling stories of our lives. For the first time in decades, I had a real friend, someone who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. Michael came to visit me every 2 weeks. He always brought something: flowers, pastries, some small detail. Our conversations had become deeper, more honest. There was no longer that uncomfortable tension of the first meetings. We were learning to relate in a new way, healthier. He had told me his divorce was almost final. Jessica had moved to another city with Robert, who apparently had left his own family for her. Michael no longer felt rage toward them, just indifference. He said therapy had helped him understand that holding on to resentment only hurt him. One Sunday afternoon, while I was drinking coffee in my small kitchen, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Susan had gone to visit her daughter that weekend, and Michael didn't plan to come until next week. I opened the door and was surprised to see my sister Margaret standing there with a large bag in her hands. She came in smiling and hugged me tight. She told me she had come to spend the day with me, that she missed our conversations and wanted to see how I was living. She took food out of the bag. She had made my favorite dish, pot roast with mashed potatoes. We sat down to eat together, and it was as if time hadn't passed, like when we were girls and shared everything. Margaret confessed something to me that day. She told me she had always admired my strength, but she had never told me that for years she had seen how Jessica treated me poorly and how Michael allowed it, and that she felt guilty for not having done more to defend me. I told her she didn't have to feel guilty, that everyone carries their own decisions, and the important thing was that now we were here, together, supporting each other. The months kept passing. Autumn gave way to winter, and then spring arrived. My life had found a pleasant rhythm. I woke up when I wanted, I cooked what I liked, I watched the movies I chose. No one told me what to do or how to do it, and that simple freedom was more valuable than anything I had had before. One day, while walking back from the market, I saw someone familiar in the distance. It was Michael, but he wasn't alone. He was walking with a woman I didn't know. They looked comfortable together, laughing at something she had said. I stood watching from afar, without them seeing me. When Michael came to visit me the following week, I asked him directly if he was seeing someone. He got a little nervous, but then smiled. He told me yes, that he had met a woman at his new job, that it was still very recent, but it felt right, that this time he was going slow, learning from his past mistakes. I asked her name. He told me her name was Linda, that she was divorced and had 2 adult children, that she was kind and honest, that she didn't play games or manipulate. I told him I was happy for him. And it was true. I wanted my son to be happy, but now from a healthy distance where his happiness didn't depend on my sacrifice. Michael asked if one day I would want to meet her. I told him maybe, when it was the right time, that there was no rush, that this time we were going to do things differently. He nodded, grateful for my understanding. One afternoon, exactly 1 year after that Christmas night, I was sitting in the park with Susan when I saw Jessica. She was on the other side of the park, alone, sitting on a bench. She looked different. Her clothes were no longer so elegant. Her hair was shorter and without the professional care she always had. She seemed tired. Our eyes met for a moment. I thought she was going to turn away, ignore me like she always did. But instead, she simply looked at me. There was no hatred in her eyes, just emptiness. I held her gaze for a few seconds and then turned my attention back to Susan, who was telling me a story about her grandkids. I didn't feel satisfaction seeing her like that. I didn't feel revenge or joy for her downfall. I just felt nothing, complete indifference. She no longer had power over me. She no longer took up space in my thoughts. She was simply someone who had been part of my past. Susan noticed my expression and asked if I was okay. I told her yes, that I was just thinking about how much my life had changed in a year, how a single night, a single decision to defend myself had changed everything. Susan took my hand and told me she was proud of me, that not many women our age had the courage to start over. That night, back in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror. I saw a 70-year-old woman with wrinkles and gray hair. But I also saw something else. I saw a woman who had survived, who had chosen her own dignity over comfort, who had learned that it is never too late to value herself. I thought about that Eleanor from a year ago, the one who lived in the shadows, accepting crumbs of affection, believing her value was in how much she could serve others. And I looked at the Eleanor of now, the one who lived in a small but own apartment, the one who had friends who valued her, the one who had established healthy boundaries with her son, the one who had chosen herself. I didn't regret anything, not the video I showed, not leaving, not starting over at this age, because all those decisions had brought me here, to this place of peace I had never known before. I lay in my bed that night feeling complete, not because I had everything I once thought I needed, but because finally I had the most important thing. I had myself, my dignity, my peace, my freedom. Michael would continue to be my son. I would love him always, but no longer from a place of need or dependence, but from a place of choice. And that difference changed everything. I closed my eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would be another day in my new life, a life that maybe had started late, but was completely mine. And that, after 70 years, was more than I ever thought I deserved. But now I knew I deserved it. I had always deserved it. It had just taken me a lifetime to learn it. And with that thought, I fell asleep, at peace. In my own space, in my own life, finally free.